I'm John Smid. I'm an ex-gay leader. I was the executive director at Love in Action International for 18 years. I was on the board of directors for Exodus International for 11 years. I've been interviewed on Larry King Live, 2020, CNN, Jerry Springer, Tyra Banks, and numerous other talk shows. I realized I was gay at a very early age. I've always been known for loving cars, and I look back at my history, and I think my love for cars came on about the same time I realized I was gay. There was a similar affection I had, but I didn't really explore that when I was younger. I was very naive. My household was pretty tumultuous, and I just remained in a naivety about my sexuality for my whole developmental years. I was attracted to guys when I was in high school and earlier, but I didn't know that was gay. I didn't know that was homosexual. I grew up in the late 50s and 60s, and we didn't talk about that stuff. So I didn't have any words. I didn't have any way to apply what I was feeling to a reality. I married a woman when I was 19, and it was primarily an escape from a painful separation I felt from a guy that I was good friends with. He moved out of town, and I just felt so devastated at the loss of that connection. And I knew someone that I had gone to high school with, and we had dated for several years, and I went to her and said, I think we should get married. And she said, okay, yeah, we should. It was nothing romantic. It was nothing, it wasn't a big, wedding thing, but for me, it also wasn't a reaction to being gay. It was a reaction to a relationship, and I just felt if I got married, then I could not have to deal with all that pain. When I first married at 19, I was sexually a virgin. I didn't really think about sex other than I was afraid of it. It was more a lack of experience when I got into the marriage, and as I look back, I had no sexual affection or sexual attraction to her, but I didn't know the difference. I never contrasted gay versus straight because I was so naive. So for me, it wasn't really about being attracted or not attracted. She was just my wife, and we had sex, and we had 2 kids. When I was about 24 years old, I met a guy that I worked with that I knew was gay. And this was after I started realizing that I was gay myself, and I hadn't talked to anyone about it. So he and I went out one night, and I exposed that part of me to him. I said, I'm gay, and I want to talk about that. And that discussion ended up in my first same-sex sexual encounter. And I realized right then and there that gay sex was a whole lot different than straight sex. I knew there was a major difference. And so I went home, and within about 2 weeks, I told my wife that I was gay and that I wanted a divorce. And I came out. I just came out. I went to started developing gay friends. I went to the gay bars. I lived in an apartment building where everyone in the building was gay. I did not care at all who knew. I was out, and that's all I wanted to be, was authentic and real and open. And so being gay to me was something I accepted and embraced almost from the moment I realized it myself. I think one of the main reasons I didn't really have an issue with being gay is that I did not have a strong religious base. I wasn't concerned about a church or a religion or a particular faith. That was not really a part of my life at the time. When I was out in my 20s, I really wanted to connect to another significant person. I wanted a relationship. And so I dated several men, and each one of those relationships ended up being either they broke off from me, or it was some kind of turmoil in the relationship, and it was really becoming kind of painful because I really didn't find that person that I really wanted to connect to in a way that was really positive and healthy. And a friend of mine at work knew that I was struggling, and she began to talk with me about the Bible and about Jesus, about her faith. And she knew I was gay, of course, because everybody did. And she began to kind of lean into the discussion about being gay is not God's best, and that's probably why I was having problems. And that there was never going to be a satisfying relationship. I would never find peace if I remained gay and moved into any kind of faith. And so I trusted her. I respected her because she seemed to know more than I did. She invited me to her church, and I began to get involved. And the messages came very clear from the church institutions that I got connected to that being gay was sinful and wrong, and you could never find peace if you remained in those gay relationships. And so I believed them. I took them at their word. I believed their authority. I think I lived for about a year kind of on the fence about whether I was going to really embrace this Christian message or if I was going to not embrace it. And after about a year, it was probably about 1982, when I just decided to sever all my ties with all my gay friends and completely embrace this Christian faith. And so it took me about 6 months to a year where I really kind of processed that reality. And so leaving my homosexual friends, the gay bars, all of that, I made a very clear cut. And from that point forward, I completely embraced the culture and the teaching and the conviction of being an evangelical Christian. When I embraced the Christian culture, it was in a Christian singles ministry. And I was around a lot of single people where we were all talking about we needed touch, we needed connection, but we knew that within our Christian faith that wasn't acceptable outside of marriage. And so I had a lot of friends and a lot of support where we all believed the same way, and I had really good connections. That was probably 2.5 years of my life that were really, really positive. I had great connections. We had a lot of fun. We did a lot of social things. I really felt fulfilled and connected during that particular time. And my sexuality was really on the back burner. It was kind of just outside the periphery because I was active and felt fulfilled. And it was just a season where I was glad to be away from the painful confusion of these conflicted relationships that I had been experiencing. When I started embracing the whole evangelical Christian message, I listened to Christian radio, I watched Christian television. I really narrowed my life to a very conservative place. On Focus on the Family, they had a guest whose name was Barbara Johnson, and she was very, very prolific in her message. And they said that they had information on ex-gay ministries, and I had never heard of that before. And so I wrote Focus on the Family back in the day when you'd handwrite things. I wrote them a letter and said, this is who I am, I'm interested in your information. And so I received in the mail an information brochure from Exodus International, and I received a phone call from Anita Worthen, who was the director's wife from Love in Action. And that phone call was an offer for me to apply for a position as an assistant house leader in one of their residential houses. That's all I knew. I had never read a book. I had never read literature. I knew nothing about this whole ex-gay ministry culture. I knew nothing about it. But I was so naive and so believing that God was going to lead me that sounded like the best plan for me. Part of the motivation in that was that my life as a single adult was desirous of someone significant. I wanted to be connected to a significant relationship, and I knew that couldn't be a man. In that culture, with those belief systems, there's no way I could ever think about or even ponder being with a man. And so I started dating women. And I thought, God's a miracle God. He can do anything. And if you're aligned with His will and you're walking obediently, He's going to make it work because God can do that. So I started dating a couple of women, and those didn't really work out. And then I found one girl that I was really connected to. We got along well, and I thought that seems to be the next best thing, is that I would possibly pursue a dating relationship with her. So we started dating a little bit, and this was about the time I heard about ex-gay ministry. It's about the same time in my process, and I thought, there's some conflicts going on here, and I'm feeling a lot of anxiety about this relationship, and I don't know how to resolve it. And I don't want another relationship to go south. I was feeling really guilty about the mistakes I'd made earlier. So I thought, ex-gay ministry, they're the professionals, they know what they're doing, and this ministry called Love in Action is led by an ex-gay man and his wife. So surely they can help me to navigate through this relationship. And so, offering me position, I desperately wanted full-time ministry because I was so loving this whole Christian thing. I accepted the position at Love in Action in 1986. I accepted the position at Love in Action for the assistant house leader, and I moved across the country to San Rafael, California, totally believing God all the way. God is going to do it. He's going to work it out. He's going to make this a possibility for me. I loved being at Love in Action because it was ministry. It was helping people. It was a place where I felt connected. There was a community. We lived in a residential home with 12 people. I loved the sense of community. I loved the relationships. I loved coming home from the office every day to a house full of people. It really felt wonderful. It was a great community. And again, being naive about what this whole thing really is all about, I just completely believed what we were doing was a wonderful and positive ministry. I was very communicative with other people about it. I told my family, my friends, I sent out monthly letters to people. You'd not believe how wonderful this is. I really believed that I was in the best possible place I could be in. We knew there were people who would have sexual experiences. We'd call them falls. They would have a sexual fall. It was very painful for everybody when that would go on, because we truly believed that the consequences of sin were great. And we were taught that. The founder of Love in Action, Frank Worthen, was very heavy-handed about the consequences of sin in our lives and how it would damage our relationship with God, how we could never succeed if we were living in sin. I mean, we were heavily indoctrinated against any kind of behavioral sin. So when someone would sexually fall that lived within our community, we would grieve terribly for them, and we wanted desperately for them to repent and to come back in and to reunite and recommit their lives to God, because we believed that was the best thing possible for anyone to live that way. The primary methodology was Christian discipleship. Frank Worthen developed a program model that was 1 year long, and in that model we had a particular curriculum of teaching materials that Frank would teach on Monday nights. On Thursday nights, we would read books that were connected to Christian discipleship. And outside of that, it was a community. Frank believed heavily that if people lived with people, communed with people, then that would iron sharpen iron, would help people round off the rough edges of their personality, of their struggles, of their temptations. It was very neutral with regards to any kinds of psychology or any form of therapy. I would say that was very minimal. It was just, this is the way God wants you to live. How can we help you get there? How can we help you live that way through repentance and forgiveness and living openly and honestly with our lives? Then we had the potential of being obedient. There was a heavy emphasis on obedience to what God's standards were. You have to be obedient. And so a lot of it was very white-knuckling. It was very much, I can make it, I can do it if I just make it one more day, if I can just live one more week for God, and then I would fall or make a mistake. Oh my God, I need to repent, I need to be honest with my authority, I need to confess my faults to my house leader and to my other brothers in the program, and in confession I can be forgiven. That was kind of a cycle. It was a cycle of being honest, confessing, forgiving, repenting, and we believed then that God would work inside as we lived in those particular patterns. Probably one of the most complicated things we dealt with was the attraction. Frank called it a psychic response, and there was a whole segment of the program, a whole teaching on psychic response, and we would talk with guys about what that was rooted in. I believed at that time, and we were taught that psychic response was rooted in envy. That people would envy those that they were attracted to, body types, body styles, attractive faces, sexual presence, that they would think about themselves, compare themselves, become envious of other people, and the envy would then convert to what Frank called a psychic response, which is basically the homosexual attraction. And the way that he would deal with that was to talk about, we need to deal with the root causes of love in action. We need to deal with the shame and the envy. And if we do that, then the psychic response will become lessened. It will minimize. And yet, the whole experience I had were the attractions. And what everyone around me was experiencing was the attractions. We just had to kind of hide it. We couldn't really expose it because we believed we were feeding it. And so it was really kind of a mind game of kind of dancing around that reality that we were all still very attracted to people of the same gender. As we lived longer in obedience, as we developed in our psychological maturity, and as we believed that homosexuality was a stunted emotional growth. We believed that it was a I can't think of the word. We believed it was stunted. It was blocked emotional growth from wounds from our past, from things that happened to us. And so if we dealt with those things, then it would unlock the natural progression towards our mature selves, which included heterosexual attraction. Frank, through his extensive research, which Frank was a student, he was a researcher, he read many, many books. He definitely was not a licensed psychologist, he wasn't any of that, but Frank was a student of the things he read, and so he based a lot of this on child development theories, on the whole process of adolescent development, of the whole attraction component of adolescent development. He had it figured out that homosexuality was in fact a developed attraction from the experiences of an adolescent teenager.
And at no time did he or anyone else or you think, well, could it actually just be natural, another sexual orientation like heterosexuality?
Many people would talk about homosexuality being natural or inborn, and my experience with ex-gay ministries at that time were that we couldn't even possibly entertain that thought, because there's no way that could be true if God said it were wrong. And so we treated homosexuality clearly from a psychic response and a behavioral model. It was clearly something that developed through a brokenness. We believe strongly in the original sin theories of humankind. We believe that sin would create certain deficits, sin would create certain problems, but we believe very strongly that God could repair them, that God could bring us to maturity. We believe that if we could continue our development, then heterosexuality would be the natural byproduct of a healthy, ongoing development.
At any point, did you yourself believe you were heterosexual?
No. There was no point where I ever believed I was heterosexual, ever in my life.
And was it difficult then, given that you weren't experiencing heterosexuality, to try to convert or move others towards heterosexuality, to reach what Frank Worthen was talking about, this maturity that would change your orientation? It must have been a sort of a cognitive dissonance there. How did you deal with that?
Though I never considered myself heterosexual, and I never conveyed to any of the people around me, or clients, or anyone else at Love in Action or within Exodus, I never conveyed that someone could ever become heterosexual. And yet there was a double mind there, because many of my messages would convey that God could enable you to be attracted to a wife, God could enable you to have a satisfactory heterosexual relationship. And in my own experience, my prayer was not, God make me straight. My prayer was, God help me to be attracted to my wife in a way that's satisfying to me and to her. And I prayed that the entire 25 years I was married to my second wife. Never found any victory, never found any satisfaction in that particular prayer. And so for me, having sex with my wife was a victory of accomplishment. It was, wow, God allows me to do this. God allows me to have good feelings in it. I must be receiving some answer to that prayer. So the first several years of my marriage, I would celebrate that God enabled me to have a sex life with my wife, one that I could accomplish. It was more an accomplishment to be able to do this thing. But I also realized something that I never was able to talk with anyone about, because I felt so ashamed about it, was that every single time I had sex with her, it was filled with horrific anxiety. I had to fight through that anxiety to even get to the place where we could have sex.
And think of men during it?
I never, I did a study one time with Dr. Spitzer, who's known for doing a study, and he interviewed me one time, and he was shocked at my answers, because I said, no, I never fantasized being with men during sex with my wife. That wasn't a part of my sex life with her. And he said, really, you're married, you've never fantasized about men? I said, no, I never did. And I was also faithful to her during that entire marriage. And the other part of that, which I say with some embarrassment now as I think about it, I was so convicted that God's ways had to be followed, that any sex outside of marriage, including masturbation, would be considered sin. And I wanted so desperately for God to bring about that attraction in me that I abstained from even masturbation for 18 years.
Wow.
I was so convinced and so convicted, and I was so hungry for God's answer that I literally sliced away any kind of external sexuality other than sex with my wife. And so for numbers of those years, we didn't have sex. So I had no sex, no orgasm, nothing for over 10 years of our marriage.
For her, that must have been difficult.
You know, I have all kinds of things that I could surmise about my wife's experience, but honestly, one of the difficulties in our marriage was we never talked about our sex life. So I don't know.
What do you make of her not wanting to talk about that? You think she would possibly want to? Why don't you think she wanted to?
The only thing I can imagine about our marriage is that we probably struggled with an unusual type of extreme codependency. When I say codependency, what I mean in that is that we were not willing to talk about the pink elephant in our own living room because neither one of us, well, I attempted to talk about it on a couple of occasions, finding a complete, I didn't want to talk about, I talked about it with her on a couple of occasions and found that she was either unable to or unwilling to respond to the conversation. In 2012, I finally came to the place after 24 years of marriage where I said, I'm done. And I'm done didn't mean I want to just go quickly and run to a gay bar. It just meant that I'm finally at the point where I am admitting to myself that this is not working, nor will it ever work. It wasn't an epiphany that brought me to the place where I said I'm done. It was that I turned 55 and I realized my years are drawing shorter and I don't want to live like this the rest of my life. And that's exactly what I told my wife at that time. I said, okay, I'm done. I'm not willing to live like this the rest of my life. Her response was, aren't you willing to pray about our marriage? I said, no. I've prayed my guts out for 24 years. And isn't that called insanity? I'm not willing anymore. I'm through.
And what was her reaction?
Tears.
How's she today?
The last time I saw her, we were at my grandson's high school graduation. She was warm and friendly. She was warm to my husband. We talked a little bit about some common friends that we had, keeping it positive. But that's the only conversation we've had since I left.
How many clients do you think you had at Love in Action all those years?
I came to Love in Action and started working there actually the beginning of 1987. I resigned in 2008. From 1987 to 2008, we had 475 residential clients. I've counted them, I know them, I've kept track of them to the best of my ability because they are important to me, because they are people that I care deeply about. And I really want to keep them on the forefront of my mind because I knew them well. And I know their histories. Many of them, I know their families and their parents. I've met them. And I'm burdened for them. I hurt for them. I grieve for my role in perpetuating something that for so many, if not most of them, created so much cognitive, is that the right word, cognitive dissonance? That created for them so much turmoil and cognitive dissonance. I mean, the difference between them being able to truly accept themselves and what we taught them is huge. Even though there were many very positive things about those relationships, positive things for them as a part of Love in Action, but it was rooted in something that was so wrong that it prohibited them from, some of them, from even taking advantage of the positive things.
Out of those 400 plus clients, how many of them went from gay to straight and did what they had hoped to achieve by going to Love in Action?
Out of 475 clients, I would say a small percentage ended up marrying someone of the opposite sex. Some of those marriages are still thriving well, maybe they're not thriving today. They're still on today. They went on to have children. Some of them seem to have decent, happy lives. But the percentage is so small of those that really feel like they're living positively today as a result of love in action. It gives me a tremendous pause. And the vast majority, if not probably 90% at least, did not in any way find what they came there for. They might have found other things. Many of them talk about communication skills. Many of them talk about dealing with family history issues. Some will talk about dealing with chemical addictions and alcohol addictions, where they came to the program chemically dependent. They left the program free of that. And so there were positive things that they experienced. None of them experienced an eradication of their homosexuality. None of them experienced freedom from the attractions or the draw to want to be with someone of the same gender.
Are some of them angry about that they didn't achieve that?
I have had conversations with several of those clients that are absolutely enraged. Really, really angry. Some of those were angry when I first talked with them and had somehow dealt with that, and we were able to work through that and get to another place where we can have an amicable conversation. But most of them are just, I would say, have really, really had to struggle to relieve themselves of the pressures that came as a result of a Christian community that says they can't be gay. There's really no pattern to the conversations I've had with the clients that I've known, because each one of their stories is so dramatically different. My primary goal when I have conversation with them is to just listen. I just want to hear their heart. I want to give them a free, safe place to be able to say whatever they want to say. And that goes on. Even just this last weekend, when I was in Memphis, I intentionally went to see someone that I had not seen in person since he was in the program. And it was just very interesting for him to share with me his feelings about having been there and what's going on in his life now. He's now married to his husband and seemingly has a very satisfying marriage, a very satisfying life. But he was able to share with me, some reactions he had to being in the program. And I just want to make myself available for that, as much as I can without it. I don't want it to dominate my life, because I don't think anything like that should dominate our lives. But I'm available and accessible to anyone who wants to share.
And are you apologizing to these folks?
I learned a long time ago that an apology is not really the right posture. I discovered the best thing to do is just to acknowledge the things that I did that were wrong. To apologize can send a wrong message to somebody who's been severely wounded. An apology can look like, I want to package this up and put it away. Well, it doesn't go away, and we can't package it up and put it away. But I can acknowledge that I taught things that are clearly wrong. I taught things that that harmed people. I taught things that were kind of goofy at the time, because many times I taught things off the cuff. I just want to acknowledge that I did something that harmed people. And so I really try to customize it to say, what are you thinking? What are you feeling about having been a part of Love in Action? What was it like for you? Oh, well, I can acknowledge, that was probably positive. I can also acknowledge, wow, I can really see how that hurt you. That's much better than me saying I'm so sorry. Because I'm so sorry sounds like crocodile tears. Many times I feel frustrated as I hear their stories, frustrated with how much I bought myself, how many things I believed myself that are just crazy, really. And I associate to what they're saying rather than to separate myself from it. Having been a leader, I want to feel what they're feeling because I can. Oh, wow, I really get that. Oh, yeah, I felt that too. Well, I went through the same thing in my own process. I spent over 20 years there, and I felt probably everything that they felt. There are some people that are surprised at my story. I think others maybe aren't, because they've seen other leaders who have come out. And some of them are angry. Some of them perceive that I shouldn't have happiness today. There are people who really think I should be suffering as a result of what I did. And so there's a real wide spectrum of response to my life today. One guy walked up to me, I remember this very vividly. During the later years I was at Love in Action, we really promoted the recovery from homosexuality as similar to any form of addiction therapy, dealing with addiction. And of course, I recognized long ago that that was absolutely insane to call homosexuality an addiction. But we just tried so hard to find an answer. We needed to find a fix for this thing that somehow we believed God said was so terrible. And one of them was to use an addiction model. So I'm walking downtown Memphis in the art district, just kind of going along, and I saw somebody that used to be a client at Love in Action, and I knew him. And I never knew what to expect, but he walked up to me and started screaming at me. Just his face was red. I am not an addict. I am not an addict. And I'm like, I know, I understand, I get it, I know, please trust me, but I'm not an addict. And I thought, okay, he just needs to get this out. But it was a very vivid moment to hear someone telling me the truth. I heard him, I understand that. And treating homosexual people that aren't an addict. In other words, there are addicts, there are chemically addicted people, but treating someone who's not chemically addicted as though they are an addict creates an intense conflict, an intense aversion inside, and it's treating people with a treatment plan that is completely misdiagnosed and misappropriated, and it will always cause people to go off the rails. It was an awful thing to do. I think anyone who looks to enter a conversion therapy program or even counseling about their homosexuality would be to, first of all, try to be as honest as you can with the question, why? What is your motivation? Because I think most people that I know that have gone through these programs, if they're honest with themselves today, their motivation was not rooted in the right place. It was usually to please someone else, or it was to appease an angry God, or it's to somehow be obedient to a religious institution or structure, which are all very, very wrong motivations. That's never really going to work. I would also ask them to be honest with themselves about what they hope the outcome to be. I think if anyone would have sat down with me and talked very clearly about expected outcomes, and if I were able to be really honest with them at the time, they probably would not choose to come back. You've got very little chance that you're going to come out of this with the expected outcomes. And because of that, it's very likely it's going to harm you. Most people who went through these programs came away with extreme despair, depression, disappointment, discouragement, because none of their expected outcomes came true.
Suicide, have you seen examples of that?
We did have some experience with suicide. There were a few people who came through Love in Action where their lives ended up in suicide. Some of them were very close to their time at Love in Action. There was an attempted suicide by one particular guy while he was at Love in Action, which was devastating to everyone. Some of them not until later in life. There was one man actually just last summer that committed suicide. But he'd been away from the program for probably 20 years. I struggle with the whole suicide reality. I struggle with it because it's complicated. It's a complex thing to try to really look at and figure out. But I do say that the whole premise that being gay is sinful and wrong and against God, when people are already struggling with emotional imbalances, can do nothing but exacerbate the problem. And so I'm not so sure that ex-gay ministry or conversion therapy creates suicide in of itself. But I will say that the underlying premise of the shame that people should feel about being gay comes from a Christian underlining that from its very beginning filters into people's lives early in their childhood. And so you get somebody who is raised in a conservative Christian home, teaching the things that we taught from the time they're children and they're gay, it builds and it builds and it builds and it builds, and it can create psychological imbalances. I think in and of itself it can create that, and can lead someone then to feel such horrific despair that they would choose to end their life in suicide. And so we were a part of that picture. We clearly were a part of that picture. Exodus closed its doors in 2013 because they recognized, as an organization, the president of Exodus, along with numerous Exodus ministries, realized there was no potential outcome that they had hoped would occur. People did not change. Alan Chambers himself said 99% of the people he's known that have sought conversion therapy experienced no change in their sexuality. Out of Exodus International came an organization called Restored Hope Network. There are people, there are some ministries that have followed into the Restored Hope Network. As I watch their page and as I look at the things that they do and the things that they say, it appears as though they're still trying to promote their message that God says homosexuality is wrong and sinful and people should seek to change. They talk about it being a loving message. They talk about it being a positive message. I just got to be honest. In the things that I see, in the quotes that I see, in the things that they're saying, I don't see the love that they're talking about. And on a personal basis, I have been treated horribly and disrespectfully because I've made the decision to be gay, to be out. I've made the decision to be out and live my life openly as a gay man. I question so many things about Restored Hope Network, but one of the worst things that I see about Restored Hope Network is they continue to convey a message that God can change people. And I just think it's set for failure. I struggle with how to respond with what I see in Restored Hope Network continuing to try to convey a message of conversion therapy. Even though they say it's not conversion therapy, they call it talk therapy. Well, therapy is therapy is therapy. Anytime you bring somebody in a room and you try to get them to change their sexuality, either through behavioral changes or psychological changes, I'm sorry, it's therapy. You can call it whatever you want. But I struggle because so many Exodus leaders now have formed a network of former ex-gay leaders that have gotten honest and they're living their lives positively and openly as gay people. I don't know how they can see that and still do what they're doing. I find that difficult. And yet, this may be an elephant in the living room or something, but the director of Restored Hope Network is the ex-wife of John Paulk. What can I say to that? You've got a woman who has been wounded, feels hurt because her husband has left her. That's just a human thing. Divorce is hard, it's painful, it's difficult, and there are many times that the people that are involved have things underneath that are unresolved. I would expect that. I understand that. But she's the director of Restored Hope Network and a person who proclaims that God has set her free from lesbianism. I don't know. That's her story. But I just think there's all kinds of room in there for motives, mixed motives about doing this thing. I would ask those people that are involved in Restored Hope Network, whether it be from Ann Paulk, the director, all the way down to organizational leaders, to people who support Restored Hope Network. I've taken the last 10 years of my life to deeply evaluate my involvement with ex-gay ministry for 24 years, 22 of them full-time. In my evaluation, I've discovered many things that I've done that were wrong, many mistakes I've made. I would ask you to just, in a moment of quiet space, to ask yourself, have I made any mistakes? Are there things about my message that I need to change? Ask yourself if there's any room to reevaluate whether or not what you're doing is right or wrong. In the quiet space of your heart, which is what I had to do. Remove from any noise, get honest with this part of you. Because I know that during 22 years of being a leader of an ex-gay ministry, I found it very difficult to allow myself to be honest with things I knew inside. I can't tell you what to do. Don't want to tell you what to do. That's not going to work anyway. But just be honest. And when I was honest, I realized I did not experience change. I knew that things that I said and things that I did were rhetoric. I knew that they were things I did and that I said were things that I didn't necessarily believe, but I communicated them because that's what I was told. That's what I was encouraged to teach. The messages that I held to were based on things that were called biblical, but as I looked at them in retrospect, they really weren't. It was a matter of being honest with yourself. And I would just ask you to do that. I don't need to hear the answer. I'm just asking you to be willing. Are you willing? Are we willing to be honest with ourselves? And do we have a place where we are willing to admit if we have made mistakes? To the parent who is considering conversion therapy, a counselor, ex-gay ministry, and you have a gay child, I want you to understand from my own experience and all the many years of dealing with this with many, many others, your child's best life is going to be lived as an authentic person. To attempt to change any form of their sexuality from an outside source will do nothing but cause them to run off the rails. It will create horrific anxiety, deep levels of confusion that may not be seen today, but it will be seen in the long term. I'm sorry, but I've never seen a real success story of anyone who's changed from homosexual to heterosexual. To the young person who sees an ad or sees a campaign or hears about ex-gay ministry or hears a sermon that people have changed, I want you to be willing to be honest with yourself. Just ask yourself inside, who are you really? Where are your attractions? If you are strongly attracted to someone of the same gender, that will not change. I'm just going to be honest with you. That is not going to change. So how do you want to live your life? What is your best case scenario? What is your vision for the future? Does it include someone of the opposite sex in marriage? And as you think about that, does that create anxiety? Versus thinking about someone of the same gender, does that create a peace, a satisfaction, a desire? Learn how to love who you are. Learn how to appreciate your gifts, your talents, your strengths. Be authentic. Learn what it means to be authentic. That means to be who you really are. I struggled a lot when Jeremy Marks, who is a leader in London, England, I struggled when he made the announcement that he was now gay affirming. That was harder for me because he was a peer, a friend. We were very close, and I believed that somehow he'd bought into the lie. And I felt abandoned by my friend, that he was going down a different path. So I think when I hear people that are exposed by someone else, I have more concern for how they're feeling. But when they admit or when they make a decision to be gay affirming, that was harder for me when my friends would do that. Of course, back then, not many were doing that.
1998, 15 right-wing organizations launched the Truth and Love advertising campaign. Can you talk about your memory of that?
When I was at Love in Action, we used to consider how we could participate in campaigns, and at one point we did a full-size billboard with my picture on the front of it in Memphis, Tennessee, and we really believed that we had a message. We had a message that people needed to hear. We were prophetic. We were proclaimers of the truth. And in 1998, they came out with a big ad campaign, and I remember Exodus was very involved in it, and many people put their money into it. And we were, I think what I felt mostly was, we're hitting it big time. The big money is getting behind us. We're finally going to be believed. We're finally going to be embraced around this country, and God's word is going to be proclaimed, and people are going to hear it, and maybe they'll turn back to God, and maybe they'll find us and they'll be able to get help. I really was kind of in a rallying mode of yay, rah, rah, it's a big spread.
Were you happy with the outcome of the campaign?
The interesting thing I experienced about the '98 campaign, which went nationwide and all kinds of newspapers and all kinds of money behind it, and not seeing much outcome from it, I don't know that it really put Exodus in a better place as an organization or any ex-gay ministry. And as I've looked back on that today, is because it really wasn't true. And I think lies get exposed. Just the nature of humanity, the nature of the universe. If it's a lie, I just don't think it can grow. And it was a lie. The lie that people can change. The lie that ex-gay ministry is really producing something. I just don't know that it can really ever have a positive outcome. One of the things I discovered about life with my husband is it's not like this big splash, oh yay, I'm out, let's celebrate, rainbow flags. That's just not who I am, and that's not who we are as a couple. But what I recognize is that the energy that I expended to try and keep up the ex-gay facade has fallen away. And I'm no longer having to self-protect. I'm not having to keep up a force field that's a deception anymore. And so the peace that I experience is the lack of unnecessary energy being expended protecting a facade. And so I'm just freer. I'm just trying to discover what it means. But I also realize the ex-gay message for so many years in my life created a false self. It harmed me internally because of the energy that I put out there to keep trying to believe it. It's taking me years to deconstruct that. It doesn't happen overnight. And I think that's a message a lot of ex-gays have, is navigating the consequences that occurred as a result of the condemning ex-gay message. It is really difficult and challenging. It takes years of counseling, years of sorting through to work that out. And I'm still in that process. I think there are times that I wake up or sit down for a moment in the day, I realize that I've reinvented myself several times for different reasons. This is the first time I reinvented myself for a positive reason. This is the first time that I've reinvented my life, my relationships, my belief systems that are rooted in something that has a positive outcome. All the other times ended up in a negative place. So yeah, it's very satisfying to finally feel like I'm putting my energy into something good. But the vast majority of the people that I knew have just dug in their heels more, have not changed their positions, and they either ghosted me, meaning they just kind of slid out of my life with no word, or they challenged me, telling me how wrong I was, and then left. It's been painful to have such a deep relationship with these people, to find that I make this shift in my life and they're nowhere to be found. They're gone. Many of them with a blazing trail of saying, you're really, really wrong, really challenging where I'm at. The churches I've been involved with, I've not known any of the churches I've been involved with to change their view. None of them have, and actually a lot of them are still communicating the same rhetoric, the same messages that they did when I was a part of them.
Are you disappointed with that?
I'm very disappointed. My husband and I just had a conversation the other night about one of the greatest points of anger I have in this deconstruction process is what appears to me to be a blatant refusal to be willing to engage a conversation. And the thing is, I understand that because I was there. I wouldn't have had the conversation either. I know what it feels like to not be willing to have that conversation. And I know that for me, it was rooted in an arrogance that I had all the answers. There was no reason to have a discussion. Yes, it's very difficult to break through that facade, very difficult. And I also recognize that it was rooted in fear. Most of my evangelical years were fueled by fear of a retributive God. That's a big thing to fight. You know, how can I fight God? How can I fight what God says? You know, who am I, oh little puny me? Because so much of my fundamentalism was rooted in I'm a sinful, broken, small, needy person that God decided to save. So how can I say? Because those people know more. Because God has the ultimate answer. How can you argue with God? Until I recognized that I had a wrong view of God. I had a wrong view of my spirituality. I adapted a shame-based view of my life. And that was something I'm having a hard time to fight against. I was astounded at what had somehow was serendipitous. I mean, that we met each other when we did, and the way that we felt with one another. We actually looked back on the weekend when I visited here as the weekend, because both of us experienced a connection at a soul level with each other that we could not deny. And so when we started dating, we really started making plans of where's this going to go. And I moved to Paris in July of 2013. We had a formal commitment celebration in November of 2013. And then in 2014, when marriage equality opened up in Oklahoma, we got married in Oklahoma legally. So it was really kind of a strange time of making that transition so quickly, and many people advised against it. But we've been together 6 years now, and you know, every year is another year of growth for us. But it's again like any people who come together, learning how to live together, learning how to merge our lives, learning what it means to be married, going through the honeymoon phase, the connection phase, moving on into kind of a daily routine, and merging our lives the way that we have. And I looked to him at one point and I said, you know, Larry, I realized that this isn't homosexual, and it's not heterosexual, it's not any of that. It's just two human beings who love each other, who come together and find peace and find connection in a relationship. I realized that through my past, I made it into something much, much bigger than it is by this duality that people think they have to fit into. And I realize now, I don't know why I made it such a big deal. I mean, why do I care who chooses to love each other? Why do I care? Why do I make that a big deal? Why can't people just love who they want to love? Spiritually, I've gone through a lot of transition. Spiritually, I've looked back at fundamentalism, and I recognize that that's not who I am as a person. Internally, I'm not a fundamentalist. That's not really, it doesn't mesh with who I am. I realize a lot of the teachings that I had absorbed, I no longer believe. I'm really going through an evaluation of what do I really believe spiritually? What do I believe? Not what does somebody else want me to believe, but what do I believe? And there are many, many things about my former beliefs that I no longer ascribe to. And I'm realizing that I have an individual spirituality, and I'm also recognizing that everyone does. I didn't think about that before. I didn't realize everyone's beliefs are different, but they try to fit them within a particular denomination or a particular church. But even within that church, they all differ, but we acted like we didn't. We didn't talk about our differences. But now I'm willing to admit we all have those differences. And I'm trying to figure out what that is for me.